A seemingly devoted mom, Susan Lee Smith went from sweet to sinister when she drowned her own kids just to chase a man. What drove her to such a shocking act? We will truly never uncover the truth, but we know that she's guilty. Hi friends, welcome back to another true crime episode. I'm Faiza, and every week I talk about a true crime story. I also talk about a horror film that I've watched whilst I get on ready with you guys. So if you're interested in anything morbid, true crime, horror films, you've come to the right place. Do like and subscribe, and let's get into today's case. So a major trigger warning for today's case. This case has themes of suicide, child murder, discrimination against the Black community, sexual violence, so viewers' discretion is advised. I won't lie, this case has affected me for years. I mean, the Susan Smith case, I've heard about it around 2016, and she reminds me a lot of Diane Downs. Some sources say that she was, a copycat killer, but she was just a young mother that didn't want to be a parent anymore. So she thought, let me just kill my children and nobody would know and I would get away with it and I would live happily ever after. I just don't understand people like that. So Susan Lee Smith was born on September 26, 1971. Her early life was marked with trauma, to be honest with you. Her father attempted suicide when she was only 7 years old. Susan hasn't been the same since, because at the age of 13, she attempted suicide but was unsuccessful. She was just never the same again when her father left the family abruptly, I think she was struggling with depression, but that's totally my assumption. As the years rolled by, her mother got remarried to a man called Beverly Russell, and it was stated that Beverly, he was sexually assaulting Susan for a number of years. And Susan told the school, her teachers, about how her stepfather was raping her. And social services were called to the house, and then Russell was removed from the home. However, somehow the family reconciled their differences and Russell moved back into the home again. So now that the social services were involved, you would think that Beverly was removed from the home. He was only on a temporary basis because everybody made up apparently, and Susan's mom, she forgave him and put him back into the house again. They all started living with each other once again, and guess what happened? He started attacking her even more. So the abuse didn't end. It lasted until she was 16 years old, and the abuse started around when she was 14, which is so sad, However, Susan's stepfather was a very important man. He was a businessman in South Carolina, and he was also part of the Republican Party. So he was heavily involved in politics and, he had a reputation. After graduating high school in 1989, she faced another suicide attempt. This time it was the end of a long-term affair she was involved with. She was sleeping with a married man. And the guy broke it off, he was like, yeah, I'm over this. And he returned back to his wife. He began to behave himself, And Susan was like, oh my God, everybody I love keeps leaving. So she felt very depressed and she attempted to take her own life. She attempted suicide by taking in a lot of prescription drugs like Tylenol, which is some sort of painkiller, I believe. I'm not sure. If I'm wrong, do correct me in the comment section down below. I would really appreciate it. What I've noticed about Susan is that she tends to seek a lot of validation and attention from people. Maybe she was deprived of that as a child, I don't know. However, as the years go by, she marries her husband, David Smith, and they have 2 sons together, Alex and Michael. Susan was only 21 when she got married, and she was a young mom. She had her kids almost straight away, and she became quite depressed. She was quite withdrawn. She wasn't really engaging with her sons. She didn't really bond with them that well. So because she was quite distant from the family, David Smith had an affair with a co-worker. However, he literally broke it off as soon as he wanted to reconcile with Susan. He just decided to end the affair. for the sake of the family. So when Susan and Michael met, he was already engaged to someone else. However, he broke off that engagement to be with Susan. I'm assuming as the years went by, he was regretting that decision. I don't know. But as soon as the pair got married, there was a lot of relationship issues going on in the home. Susan was distant, like I said, and she winded up having an affair with a married man at the workplace. So there's a lot of affairs going on. I mean, like I said, Susan loves attention and validation, so she was going to get it regardless. So as Susan was having marital problems with David, she winded up sleeping with her boss at her workplace, and he was also a married man. And then she starts sleeping with his son, called Tom Findlay. So Tom worked at the Console, the textile manufacturing plant, and Susan was the secretary working there. The two had like a very casual relationship. Nothing was quite solidified, you know. It was just sex. Tom never took her seriously. However, Susan caught feelings, and her feelings ran deep. So Tom finds out that Susan was sleeping with his father, and I'm thinking, is this a real story? Oh my God. Susan has been here, there, everywhere. And when he finds that out, he was like, yeah, he was completely disgusted, and he ended things with her. I find it quite cliche as well, like sleeping with your secretary, you're a married man. I mean, did Tom Findlay's dad know she was also sleeping with his son? Maybe they just didn't care, I don't know. Regardless, it's quite messy, isn't it? So this leads us to October 25th, 1994. Susan claimed to the police that a black man carjacked her while she was driving her sons in her 1990 Mazda Protege. She was driving this red car, right? All of a sudden, a black man appeared, okay? Emphasis on a black man in his 20s, and he was wearing a hoodie, and he flagged her down. He carjacked them, and then Susan managed to get out of the car after a while, and he took off with her two sons, okay? So her sons were kidnapped by a black man. As you can hear from my tone, that wasn't true, but we're going to get to that. So this woman, Susan, was on national television for 9 straight days. She made emotional pleas like, oh my God, where are my sons? Bring my sons back. And you can tell that it wasn't genuine. And there will be moments where as soon as the camera comes on, she will be crying, wailing. And then as soon as the cameras go off, you could see her smiling and her demeanor keeps changing. I wonder why that is. So let's run past all of her lies because it's just going to annoy me. So let's skip forward to November 3rd, 1990. However, on November 3rd, she confessed to police that she allowed her car to roll down into John D. Lake and drowning both of her boys. They were both strapped in their car seats. They had no way to escape, and she allowed the car to roll down into the lake, and she watched it sink for over 6 minutes. Initially, she tried to commit suicide with her sons, and she later claimed that she didn't want her sons to live without her. But I believe that isn't true at all, to be honest. Later on, she admits to police that she wanted to commit suicide alongside with her sons. And when the police asked her, why did you want to kill yourself with your children? Why couldn't you just do it yourself? And she said she didn't want her sons to grow up without a mother. But we know that was the furthest from the truth. So many reports suggest that she did this so she can maintain a relationship with Tom Findlay, because what was in the car when Susan drowned her kids? The letter that Tom Findlay wrote to her. It was a very long, detailed letter. I have read it, and I'm going to read it out to you guys in part 2 because I can't fit everything into one video. And it's a very detailed letter explaining how they can't be together, and he doesn't want the responsibility of her children because Tom Findlay didn't want to have children. In the letter, it does give me the impression that Tom believes that he is way better than Susan based on their economic backgrounds, you know. So he does sound a little full of himself because he has a rich daddy. That's why, I guess, I don't know. However, Susan insisted that she had no plans or motive for the murders. They just happened, you know. I don't know but I just felt like murdering my kids. As you can tell by now, Susan has a terrible habit of lying so much. What was heartbreaking is that her son Michael asked her when they were driving around where they were going, and she simply didn't answer him. She blamed her children for not having a successful love life, even though she was the one sleeping with married men and, debasing herself at work. So on the night of the murders, she was sitting outside of John D. Lake with her sons, and she was parked there for a while. And she slowly gets out with her kids still strapped in the back, and she places her car on neutral. The car slowly rolls down the hill into the lake, and she just stood there and watched them drown for 6 minutes. The car reached to the bottom of the lake, which was over 215 feet. But from the very beginning, Susan's story had so many holes and she kept contradicting herself. She doesn't look like a mother that was grieving her children. She wasn't like in a frantic state, because when your child goes missing, you won't be able to eat or sleep. You'll be helping the detectives. You will go above and beyond. You would scour the earth to find your children again. But with Susan, she enjoyed the attention. And with David, if you see his face, his demeanor was like he was heartbroken, he was worried, sick, and he wasn't that talkative because he was in a state of shock, because so many days went by and he was just, oh my God, thinking, where are my kids, where are my kids? However, the detectives really did hope that her children were still alive and they were being held captive somewhere. However, that wasn't the case. So detectives, they were searching bodies of water and they found Susan's car on the bottom of the lake. And when search teams dived down and swam down to, retrieve the car and everything, they saw the two boys still strapped in their car seats, heavily decomposed, with Michael's hand pressed against the glass. It was absolutely horrifying to see all of that. So Susan took a polygraph test 2 days after the boys were discovered. There were more inconsistencies in her story and further doubts. For instance, Susan claimed that at the intersection, there was no other vehicle present. And now she's saying that there was someone else present, because the lights turned red. If the traffic lights turn red, it means another vehicle is trying to, go by. So the investigators were like, there is obviously holes in your story. You're lying. So you're the only one that saw your kids alive last. So there's more to it than that, isn't it? So as you can imagine, Susan loved being in front of the camera and she was pleading to the public for 9 days, and it became a huge media firestorm. And, the manhunt of finding this fake black man that allegedly kidnapped her kids, they already knew, I don't think there was anyone else involved. People from across the country were looking for the two boys, and so many black men were arrested, questioned, and released, and it must have been so traumatizing for them. During the trial in 1995, Susan's defense team were led by David Brooke and Judy Clark. They argued that Susan was deeply troubled and she has bipolar disorder and she was depressed and she was a very unwell woman. Her parents hired a high-profile defense team. Their whole defense was that Susan was acting out of sadness and despair rather than evil intent. So Susan was initially trying to take her own life, but she decided to take the lives of her sons instead because to her sons were a burden. They were in the way of her love life, and she thought she was going to get away with it, She thought herself and Tom Finley will find a way back together again because he mentioned that he doesn't like children, he doesn't want to have children, he doesn't want to be responsible for her children, and he wants to live a child-free life. So she thought, I'm going to be child-free too. And then she decided to murder her kids. And then she decided to blame a black man for all of this. For every horrible thing she has done, she's going to blame the whole black community. It's disgusting. However, for Miss Susan Smith, the jury took only 2.5 hours to find her guilty. During the sentencing phase, lead prosecutor Tommy Pope advocated strongly for the death penalty. but ultimately the jury decided against it. Should this be a death penalty case? I don't know. You tell me. A prison psychiatrist diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder and major depression. These disorders might be there, but why kill your children? Were they an inconvenience to you, Susan? Fast forward 5 years later, in the year 2000, 2 correctional officers were charged for having sexual relations with her, and which led Susan to be transferred to the Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood. I have absolutely no words for this woman. Her libido still runs high after everything she has done. So Susan's first opportunity for parole happened in November of 2024, only last year. She was denied. Reports say that she wasn't able to get parole because of all of the bad behavior and the rendezvousing she was doing in prison. She also was charged for battery, for mutilating another female inmate. She also smuggled in drugs in prison. I mean, if you're in prison for life, I wouldn't blame you for not being sober, you know? David Smith has then moved on. He got married again and he has 2 more children. He has attended the parole meeting last year and he said, and I quote, "This wasn't a tragic mistake." And he will do anything he can to keep her behind bars because she hasn't shown any remorse. So the idea of a white woman accusing a black man of a crime that she has committed, even though this black person that she's accusing of doesn't even exist, harkens back to the time of when Emmett Till, he was allegedly accused of a crime that he didn't even commit, and then he had to suffer the consequences of the accuser. Susan was like, "Oh, it was a black man in his 20s wearing a hoodie that kidnapped and killed my children. And I happened to be here and I'm completely unharmed." This case is about a woman that is just so evil and selfish, and she would go above and beyond to get what she wants. She will lie, cheat, steal, and even kill to live the life that she wants. Susan showed no remorse, and every time she cries on camera, it is just, you can just feel it in your bones that it's all fake. She intended to kill her children to be child-free. David hasn't spoken to Susan ever since. He showed up to the parole hearing and he was going to remind the jury and the parole board that she shouldn't walk free. He also mentioned that 15 years for each son isn't justice and she should be serving life without the possibility of parole. But she was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. I really do hope that David finds peace and he's able to move on. And those poor boys, they didn't deserve what happened to them. They were innocent, sweet babies, and I just don't understand why someone would do this. This does bring us to the end of today's case. Do let me know your thoughts and opinions down below. I am going to read out Tom Findlay's letter to Susan, and I'm going to attach it to the description box below. Till then, please do stay safe and hydrated, and I will see you guys again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.